Well, welcome everyone to the 2026 Classes Without Quizzes program. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Colin Robinson, and I have the pleasure of hosting the event today. I received my BS degree from CFANS in Environmental Science in 2021, and I currently serve on the CFANS Alumni Society board and am chair for this event. The Classes Without Quizzes program was established by the CFANS Alumni Society in 2002 as a way to keep alumni and friends connected to the college and to highlight the new, exciting, and impactful research being done by our faculty. Over the last 24 years, more than 1,200 alumni and friends have joined this learning adventure, with many in person when we hosted it on the St. Paul campus. We've enjoyed expanding our reach since shifting the program to a virtual event in 2020. This program is one way we bring to life our board mission to foster relationships that benefit our college, alumni, students, and friends by sharing the awesome and important research going on throughout CFANS. So we hope you enjoy the program. With that, we are excited to welcome you to the title of this year's session, Minnesota's Invisible Water Infrastructure: What Really Determines the Quality and Quantity of Our Water Resources. While our iconic lakes and rivers capture headlines, many of the most consequential actions affecting Minnesota's water are shaped by the management of our streets, soils, and wastewater systems. Today, we will learn from our experts how the university partners with practitioners to manage the invisible infrastructure that determines the quality and quantity of our most precious resource. We'll start with an introduction from the director of the Water Resources Center, then have lightning presentations from three speakers. We encourage you to add your questions to the chat throughout the presentations, and we will moderate a brief Q&A after the speakers all finish. And then at the end, you'll have the option to interact with our faculty presenters in a breakout room for more engagement and questions. These rooms will be open for about 10-15 minutes after the program closes, and you'll be able to move from the room to room if you would prefer. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bonnie Keeler, Director of the Water Resources Center, to provide an introduction. In this role, she guides the Interdisciplinary Center, encourages and strengthens the link among university water resources, research, and extension, promotes graduate education and training in water resources science. So welcome to Bonnie.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks so much for being here. Mary, I'll have you advance the slides for me. Appreciate everyone joining us, the CFANS alums that are on and friends of the Water Resources Center and colleagues, wherever you're calling in from. Thanks for being here. So as Colin mentioned, I'm the director of the Water Resources Center at the University of Minnesota. A little bit about us. Our center is jointly housed in CFANS and the University of Minnesota Extension. And that partnership, I think, really embodies this research to practice goal of the land grant university. We've been around for over 60 years, and our mission is to ensure that Minnesota's water resource decisions are grounded in locally relevant research and expertise. So we are not an advocacy organization. We don't have an agenda. We just want Minnesotans and the water resource professionals that serve the state to have the best possible information and the best possible education and training that helps them do their work to protect our water. We do that by investing in trusted relationships with water leaders. We meet them in the communities where they work, and our research programs are informed by the needs of those practitioners. So this is not ivory tower work. This is real public service. We're supporting these practitioners and professionals. We're giving them access to world-class research. And we also hold our university researchers accountable to the public. We make sure that they are actually doing work that matters, that they're hearing from communities about the problems that they face, their technical challenges, their implementation challenges. And we make sure that we're investing in research and development that meets those challenges. Next slide. The other thing to know about the Water Resources Center is we're part of a national network of federally funded water institutes with support from the Federal Water Resources Research Act. And we partner with the USGS to administer research funds that are based in the priorities of each state. But that also means that we're connected to this amazing network of research institutes across every state and US territory. And we use that network all the time. In our programming, we learn from best practices in other states, and we make sure that we're delivering research and extension programs that draw on and bring in insights from researchers from across this network of land grant partners. Next. We are a staff of about 27. We're actually based all over the state. Our home base is here, where I'm speaking to you from McNeil Hall in the St. Paul campus, but we actually have educators that are all over from the Southwest to the Northeast. And these educators have decades of experience working in their communities, and they have longstanding relationships. They're often from the communities that they're based in. And we know that like getting trusted advice from someone who knows your neighbors and knows your community, that goes a long way in building credibility and building partnerships. So many of our staff have long years of experience at the university, and the practitioner communities, they know our researchers and our educators, and they trust them. And our educators take that trust very seriously as they deliver on their programs. Next slide. So today we're going to hear from three of the program leaders at the Water Resources Center. We're going to hear from Anna and John and Dan. But before I turn it over to them, I just want to take a minute to set up the context for this presentation, why we're talking about Minnesota's invisible water infrastructure. Next slide. So here we are. It's the first week after Memorial Day. If you're in Minnesota, you know that it's our first week of like true summer temperatures. So everyone's starting to plan their summer vacations. And if you're in Minnesota, you're Minnesotan, you know that you typically organize your recreational activities, your summer plans around water. And when you think about water in Minnesota, you probably picture a landscape like this. You're thinking about lakes and rivers and streams, and we are super fortunate here to have access to incredible water resources. We have 250 million acres of lakes and rivers. We have the headwaters of the Mississippi. We have the shoreline of Lake Superior, the greatest of all of the Great Lakes. So water is really our state's most valuable asset, and it distinguishes Minnesota from other states. It's really our competitive advantage. Next. And we know from polling that people support this sentiment. So Minnesotans really value water. They care about water. This is from recent CFANS polling, found that 97% of residents value the importance of Minnesota lakes and rivers to their quality of life, and significant majorities support public funding for water research. Water really benefits from broad public support across the state. So 56% of Minnesota voters supported the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment in 2008. 77% of voters approved renewal of the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund in 2024. So we really have broad public support for water in the state of Minnesota. Next. But we're not alone in caring about water. In fact, Gallup has been polling Americans since the 1990s to ask them about their most pressing environmental issues, and water is consistently ranked at the top of that list. So here you see results of that polling: drinking water pollution, river and lake pollution. These are the number one and number two issues of concern, and that these environmental issues related to water really top all other environmental concerns from the public. So we know that there's broad national support for water. Next. So we have these amazing water resources, and we know that the public really cares about clean water. But what if I told you that most of us are actually paying attention to the wrong thing? That we care about water, but we're often really ignoring the real drivers of change that affect the quality and quantity of our public waters. So this is really the challenge. And what we're here to talk to you today about is that so much of what determines the quality and the quantity of our water is really invisible. And because it's invisible, there's no surprise that there's a big disconnect between what people perceive when we're out swimming or boating or fishing, what really garners public attention, and then the behind the scenes work that it actually takes to keep our lakes and rivers clean. So if you look at this picture of the Mississippi River, you can see this beautiful water, nice shoreline, but what you don't see is the groundwater. What you don't see are the stormwater drains, the rain that flows off of our streets and into receiving waters. We don't see the impacts of erosion. You don't see the quality of the water. You can't perceive how much nutrient or sediment or contaminants are in those water bodies. So it's really hard to balance what is visible and what's invisible when we think about what really determines the quality of our water resources. Next. So what happens is we only pay attention to this invisible infrastructure when it fails or when there's a crisis. So when there's a flood, when there's a broken storm drain, when there's a sewage overflow, when there's a chemical spill. So just like there's no news about airplanes that don't crash, there's also new news about water management that's just working in the background. And as that stuff that's working, because we don't see its impact unless it's broken, we don't always appreciate the important service that it's doing for our state. And we don't always appreciate or are aware of the people who study, who manage, who educate all of the practitioners that sustain and manage that infrastructure. And that lack of awareness for this important invisible water infrastructure is really can be a problem if we forget that these systems need sustained investment. Next. So today you're going to hear some about the work of the Water Resources Center that supports this invisible water infrastructure. We're going to talk today about just three of our programs, work on soils, on stormwaters, and on septic systems and wastewater infrastructure. So Anna Cates is going to talk about soils and the ways that soil health is connected to water quality, and as part of the Minnesota Office for Soil Health and one of a team of educators and researchers that's really devoted her career to working with farmers and producers, providing that kind of really trusted embedded expertise that's based in Minnesota research. And then John Bellata is going to talk about the work of the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council, and I'll let John explain why you should all care a lot about stormwater. But what you should also know is that his program is really a national model for how to close the loop between research and practice. So John's program funds millions of dollars of research into best practices in managing stormwater. But unlike other research programs that are just kind of run by academics, in this case, it's really his practitioner community who decides on the research priorities, and the projects that John funds are required to have plans for technology transfer. And that program also supports extension educators who work with practitioners to make sure that all of the insights that are derived from that research are translated and communicated to the broadest possible audience. And then Dan Wheeler is going to talk about the on-site sewage treatment program of the Water Resources Center. Dan and his team of educators have decades of experience working on septic systems with a focus on both education and then also research. And whether or not you personally have a septic system, I actually have a septic system, but trust me, you want these systems to work. They are critical to the health of our water bodies. They're critical for human health. So you want to hear how Dan's team is working across Minnesota and nationally to make sure that these systems are functioning and that the professionals who design and maintain and install and inspect these systems have access to best in class education and research. So what I'm hoping you appreciate today is just a few of these aspects of this critical, invisible water infrastructure, and also the people and the programs and the practitioners that work on our behalf to keep our water clean and abundant. And just a reminder, like these aren't the issues that are going to be in the headlines of the news. This isn't the hot button political issues. And they're probably not things that you're thinking about when you're planning your summer vacation to your lake cabin or your favorite state park. But I hope it gives you an appreciation for how much happens behind the scenes to really protect our water resources, and particularly how the University of Minnesota is supporting that research and those partnerships and the education that we need to really sustain this incredibly important but pretty invisible water infrastructure. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Anna Cates.
Hi
All right,
there.
I'll just introduce you real quick, Anna Cates, with your qualifications, because it looks like we did some research on you. You received your MS in Soil Science and Agroecology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, along with your PhD in Agronomy from Madison as well. And so she's been with CFANS since 2018 and is now officially on the good side. So let's hear from Anna Cates.
I will say I'm still a Packer fan. My dad would disown me if I wasn't.
Okay,
Uh,
never mind.
Um, yeah, so thanks for that. As Bonnie said, I work on the agricultural water side, and I work with something called the Minnesota Office for Soil Health, which is a partnership between the Water Resources Center and the Board of Water and Soil Resources, funded by that Clean Water Land and Legacy funds that she mentioned. Our big goal in our work is to increase the adoption of soil health practices to protect water quality. And we do that through a few methods I'm going to highlight. But first, go to the next slide and we'll just discuss why this is important in the big water quality picture. So this is just a general image of the water cycle. And like I said, I work really in that part that looks like a big farm field in the middle with water going up and down through rain, evaporation. But we have colleagues who work more closely with the tile lines that take water out from under this farm fields and directly into the lakes and rivers via the ditch system. And we have some colleagues who work a little bit more on the irrigation side. So water is going to hit the land across Minnesota with rain, and about 50% of that is going to fall in an agricultural field. And what happens to that water after it hits the agricultural field depends on a lot of different management decisions a farmer might make, like what is growing, how much disturbance has occurred, what other inputs have been applied, the slope of the land, any the animal influence on the land. So there's a number of ways that what a farmer does can change how water behaves afterward, what contaminants it might carry with it, how fast it reaches our streams and rivers. So a lot of what I focus on are those management decisions that might change how the water behaves and the water quality. Go ahead to the next slide and I'll just do a quick research highlight on that. One of the things we work on a lot is cover crops. Cover crops are grown outside of the cash crop season. Minnesota mostly grows corn and soybeans as their cash crops during the summer, and a cover crop gives you something growing in the fall or the spring. So I have a master's student who is looking at how much cover crop do you actually need to grow to stop erosion from occurring on the land. So erosion is related to water movement because it's the water that often carries the soil right off the slope of the field. And so what he's doing, he's saying, well, if I have more cover crop biomass, is that going to change how much erosion occurs in the field? And we are actually seeing some effects of the amount of biomass, is what this figure shows. But we also see a big effect of the amount of precipitation. So I have to collaborate with my climate scientist colleagues to think about how much cover crop biomass you might need in different climate scenarios. But this ends up being really important to both farmers who want to understand how to use a practice like cover crops effectively, and to agencies that are willing to use cost share programs to fund farmers' cover crop practices. But they want that money to be well spent. That's all of our taxpayer money. So research like this is really directly answering agency questions around how can we best use taxpayer money on a practice like cover crops that reduces erosion on the landscape. So go ahead to the next one. Another big element of our work is trying to do training and skill building for agricultural professionals. So we sometimes imagine a farm situation as a single person sitting in an office or in a tractor making decisions about how they're going to manage their land. Are they going to plant a cover crop this year? How much fertilizer will they put on? But actually that decision is usually made in consultation with people who sell seeds, people who sell fertilizer, in consultation with advisors at a local government office like a soil and water conservation district, advisors who give professional advice or who are experts in disease or other elements of plant health or agronomy. So no one's making these decisions by themselves. And when we think about how to change management across the landscape, we really think a lot about trying to make sure we reach a lot of those decision makers, not just the person who owns the land and is listed as a farmer according to the US Census. So this course was made to give more cover crop skills to a lot of the conservation professionals around the state. These people work in soil and water districts in that kind of space, and they're often administering a program on cover crops, again, taking care of our taxpayer funds. And they maybe needed more skills around exactly how to agronomically manage the cover crops. So we want to make sure that farmers who are getting funds from the government are also getting excellent advice. And we want to make sure that the people who are building those cover crop programs know each other, can learn from each other, and can build a network across the state. So this was a training program we ran for a couple of years to build those skills at 3 locations around the state. You can move on to the next slide because this really ties right into my my work around network building. So extension faculty get to do this maybe a little bit more than the faculty who teach undergraduates. We really get to think about all the different stakeholders who might be interested in our research. So in my focus area of soil health, there's a lot of different stakeholders who might want to work on soil health in order to meet different goals. For example, I work with industry partners who are interested in helping farmers adopt soil health practices to help them meet their supply chain carbon footprint goals. That's really different than a farmer who might want to use a cover crop so that they can meet their goal of spending less time cleaning out their ditch from sediment that would have washed into it. So these people have different goals, but they're both interested in doing cover crops. So bringing them together to think about how can we create agricultural infrastructure, systems, cost share policies that meet many of our goals working on the same practices, or how can we just at least be aware of the goal, other goals in the room from other stakeholders? Agriculture is a pretty complicated space where government and private industry and individuals and all of us as stakeholders in the environment kind of have a voice. And we try to bring those people together. So the next slide has some quotes from some of so we bring people together because we think they need to talk to each other, sharing these interests. And the next slide has some quotes from some of the events that we've run. This is a list of people. You can see, like I said, it encompasses a large range of groups. We have NGOs. This has been a rich stakeholder convening process over a few years. Now we can move on to what they said. Thank you, Mary. So this is from some of the every other year forums we've been hosting. We've tried to make the time spent together focused on hearing from groups that you might not hear from and planning for future actions. So we try to say, okay, you've been here for a few hours today, you've learned something new, where can you apply it? We've built out a statewide soil health action framework where together we identified some priorities for strategies to improve soil health adoption across Minnesota. And then we try in these check-ins to say, well, who can make progress towards this goal? Who can best make progress toward that goal? My last slide just indicates that, if you go one more, Mary, that we just, have a lot left to do on this. People like spending the time together, and then they always recognize that spending the time together is not enough. So the networking, in my case, goes hand in hand with the training and the research elements and supporting efforts that other industries are able to make in other areas. So if you want to talk more about what agriculture in Minnesota looks like, how we can make it a little bit, how we can help management support water quality and quantity, then we can talk afterward.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna, for telling us about soil health, water, and the community involvement and how they all interact. It's quite interesting. All right, so it looks like next we'll hear from John Belota, the Senior Research and Extension Coordinator at the Center, where he leads the Minnesota Stormwater Research and Technology Transfer Program, including leading the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. So John, we'll pass it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Colin, and thanks, Anna, for setting us up, because I'm going to take you from the farm field Anna talked about with agricultural water, and we're going to go into the urban centers and talk about our efforts in urban stormwater across the state. The goal behind the Urban Stormwater Research Program at the Water Resources Center is to prevent, minimize, and mitigate the effects of urban runoff to Minnesota's water resources that Bonnie highlighted in her introduction. We have two major efforts that we're trying to do, and that is to facilitate and complete priority research for urban communities and their stormwater management across the state. And we realize that, information to us generated at the university is no good to us sitting on a shelf. And so we have a program that makes sure that we transfer that knowledge, transfer the discoveries out to the professionals that manage urban stormwater so they can minimize, prevent, and mitigate the impacts of urban runoff in the communities. Next slide. Like Anna, I thought I would start with a little hydrology 101 in terms of why we have an urban stormwater runoff problem in Minnesota and across the country. And to understand this is to look back before you and I were here in an undeveloped landscape. In an undeveloped landscape, about 50% of the various forms of precipitation soaked into the ground, and about 40% evaporated or transpired through plant stomata, their breathing back up into the atmosphere. And only about 10% of the precipitation ran off the landscape, creating our lakes, our rivers, our streams, and our wetlands. However, that's not what exists in our urban environments today. Next slide. So when we add development to our landscape, so this includes buildings and parking lots and homes and sidewalks and rooftops, these surfaces that are impervious. They don't allow water to soak into the ground, the asphalt and the concrete. We change that hydrologic regime within these urban environments. And only 10% now is able to infiltrate in the ground. And the majority of the precipitation runs off the landscape. And so we go from a slow and steady runoff regime to fast and furious in urban environments. And that creates some challenges. Next. So what we refer to as the impacts from this fast and furious are impacts from the runoff, which really are in three major areas. We have decreased quality, we have increased quantity of runoff, and it's just faster. And when we look at the pollutants in that stormwater runoff, we typically think about 6 different categories. Nutrients, this is like excessive phosphorus and nitrogen. By the way, my colleagues always try to remind all of us that not all nutrients are bad in runoff. Phosphorus is a natural part of the system. It's this, we're concerned about excessive amounts of phosphorus and nutrients. But there's also other contaminants like debris. These are your pop bottles and your cigarette butts. We have pathogens like E. coli bacteria, sediment or soil out of place, we often call dirt. Soil and dirt and erosion is a pollutant itself, but I often try to talk to community members about where the sediment goes. It's like a school bus. So when you get erosion, there's a lot of other pollutants that attach themselves to the soil particle that go along with it, including things like toxic contaminants. And the other piece is just heat or thermal pollution. So as Bonnie talked about, one of our warmest weeks of the year now going into Minnesota summer. So think about how warm the pavement is starting to get. And so when we get precipitation and it runs off, it is now warmer than the receiving water. And so thermal or heat stress is also a type of pollutant. Next. So in urban areas, we look at managing the stormwater runoff using innovative ways. And it's not just one of these 4 ways on the screen, it's all 4 of them working in unison. There are parts of our system that we must infiltrate urban stormwater runoff. In other areas, we have to filter the pollutants out. We still need to carry some runoff away from Main Street, away from our basement, so we need a conveyance system. And we also need to store some of this water so it isn't all flushed downstream at one time. Next. So what I want to do is give you a little flavor for what we're doing at the Water Resource Center in terms of research into urban stormwater and the different practices that we use to help us manage urban runoff. One of those is in the field of bioretention, biofiltration, bioinfiltration. Well, most people refer to these things as rain gardens, but the scientific terms are these longer ones at the top of the screen. But what I'm really talking about, rain gardens. And one of those is pictured here on the screen. And these are not just pretty aesthetic gardens along the roadside. They are actually performing a stormwater function. And what we're looking at in terms of research is the water coming in to these rain gardens, the red star here on the map. For example, the stormwater runoff coming into this rain garden, how much chloride from winter road de-icers is in that runoff? Because it will impact the middle star, what type of plants we put in this rain garden that will survive. And it's not just a garden built on the soil that was along this curb line. It's actually an engineered soil that allows for infiltration, proper plant growth, and soil microbes to help us break down contaminants. Next slide. So part of the work that we're doing in research is coming up with tools for practitioners in cities and other communities to help manage their rain gardens. For example, what is actually illustrated here in these pictures is one of our research projects developed an application, a smartphone app, that helped designers select which types of plants to put in rain gardens, but also on the back end to be able to go out in the field and identify them with their phones so they knew how to maintain the rain gardens after they're put in. And so what we're doing with the research is creating the tools and then actually integrating them into extension certification workshops to train professionals how to operate and maintain rain gardens. If you've ever been out to the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum and you parked there, you probably parked alongside one of the 8 large rain gardens there at the Landscape Arboretum. This is where we have our annual training course on rain garden maintenance, for example. Next. Another program that we work in, another area, is in street sweeping. And perhaps you've been stuck behind a street sweeper driving very slow down the street. We don't sweep streets to make them look pretty. We're sweeping streets to pick up the pollutants before we get these rainfall events in April, May, and June. If we can pick up the pollutants before that precipitation happens, we can keep it from going down in the runoff. Over a series of about 10 years, we've done a lot of work in street sweeping. And what we've identified is different ways for cities who are predominantly responsible for street sweeping, what sweeper they use, how often do they sweep, where do they sweep, how fast do they sweep, and what do they do with the materials after they collected them. That is what the research has done, and now what we're doing is, through the Clean Sweep program, is training city staff from all across Minnesota to adopt new street sweeping plans within their community. And we often hear from city people talking about insights from the street sweeping program help them optimize what they were doing, how they were sweeping their streets in a particular city. Next. The other big area that we're working in is in stormwater ponds. And ponds take a lot of different form and functions. You probably drive, walk, bike by many of these in the communities that you live. These ponds are meant to capture stormwater runoff and remove the pollutants before they get to the receiving water, like the Mississippi River or one of our precious lakes or streams or wetlands. In many parts of Minnesota, we developed post-World War II, and many of these ponds were put in those decades after World War II. And like the roof that you have on your house or your apartment, they have a lifespan. And many of these ponds have been trying to do their function for many decades, and we're finding out they need to be rehabilitated. And so we're looking at what needs to happen in these ponds for them to more effectively remove pollutants in the future. Next slide. There's a lot of things going on in the stormwater ponds, and some of the research that we've done at the Water Resources Center is actually we found 30% of our ponds are exporting more phosphorus than they were supposed to be trapping. That's a big problem. And everyone loves trees, right? But trees have grown up around the ponds and they prevent the wind from turning over the water. And the water goes from an aerobic state where it has oxygen to anaerobic. So we love trees, but around ponds, they can present challenges in terms of how they function for their stormwater efficiency. Next slide. So we're doing a lot of research in stormwater ponds. We recently brought together more than 185 pond professionals from across Minnesota in our first ever stormwater pond symposium back in April. And what our participants learned is how they could assess their ponds to find out if they're trapping or exporting more nutrients or pollutants than they're trapping. And they're learning about plants in ponds. For example, what's pictured here is duckweed, a free-floating plant. And does a free-floating plant benefit the operation of the pond, or is it impacting the pond performance in a negative way? Next slide. I think we're going on to Dan from there. If you have questions about how many stormwater ponds we're managing in the city, you can join me in a breakout session after we get done here.
All right, thank you, John. That's a lot of cool and interesting information. So thanks for sharing your work with all of that and the transfer of knowledge to community practitioners. It's very interesting. All right, so next we'll switch gears to septic and water. I would like to welcome Dan Wheeler. Dan is a research fellow instructor in the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate and the Water Resources Center. He has an MS degree in soil science with a water resources minor and a BS in environmental science from the University of Minnesota. So thank you, Dan, for speaking us with today. Let's see what you got.
All right, thank you, Colin. And we're shooting to be done with comments here at 12:45. Is that correct?
You're good.
Okay. Thanks again for coming today, everyone. Thanks for John kind of walking through what's going on in urban settings, Anna for talking about farm fields. What's left is everything else in Minnesota and our waters, and so that's kind of where septic systems or our on-site sewage treatment program fits in. That we're across the landscape from the farmyards to, kind of the fringes of those urban areas and everywhere in between, that there are those hidden septic systems, or as we call them, sewage treatment systems across Minnesota. Our program is called the On-Site Sewage Treatment Program, and we do a lot of different things in our program, educating professionals, educating homeowners, doing a good amount of research that is to inform our education, and then just provide general information via publications and our website to homeowners and other interested parties in how those wastewater treatment systems work across Minnesota. And so again, we're doing that with our education programs. We have research projects, a number of publications that are available either for low price or for free on our websites. We're involved with lots of organizations as well to make sure that we understand what the need is for education across Minnesota. You can go and do the next slide. So one of the things you might not think about, you might not appreciate, this goes to kind of the sight unseen topic here, is a little bit of numbers here to wrap our heads around. So why are we worried about our wastewater in Minnesota? Well, we do have, according to 2025, so last year's annual report by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, we have over 650,000 septic systems across Minnesota. Many of those are for private individual residences, but many of them are not. So there can be ones for, commercial facilities, restaurants, could be numerous homes hooked up to a larger system. But so there's over 650,000 of these across the state, in every which corner or next to lakes, miles from lakes and everything in between. Collectively, if we look at how much water that is on a daily basis, that is over 195 million gallons of wastewater that's being treated and also dispersed through our soils and through our Minnesota landscapes every single day. Just for reference, I looked up what the largest wastewater treatment plant that deals with municipal wastewater treats in a day, and that's the Metro plant. So those of you that were ever on campus and ever used the restroom facilities when you were on St. Paul campus or the university campus, that water all goes to the Pig's Eye or the Metro plant. And that plant treats about 172 million gallons of wastewater a day. So our septic systems are treating more than the Metro plant in total every day. So a pretty important thing. And so we want to make sure that that's done appropriately. What our role is first and foremost with that is that we want to make sure that the professionals that are doing all of that work, from the maintenance of it to the design to the installation to the regulations, all have the same education and have adequate education to make sure that our resources are protected each and every one of those days. The other thing that I just like to point out that's a big difference between our wastewater that we use with septic systems versus that wastewater that goes to a municipal wastewater treatment plant like a Pig's Eye or a Metro plant or a smaller system that we've got in many municipalities around Minnesota is when we use a septic system, that water is actually returned to where it came from. So a lot of times we're replenishing that water locally. So it gets not only treated locally with our soils and our septic tanks, but it also then is returned clean back to the environment. So it's ready to replenish water supply, whether that's surface waters, lakes, wetlands, streams, whether that's deeper groundwater aquifers or anything in between, that is a really important part of our functioning of those larger hydrology cycles in Minnesota, and something that a lot of times is overlooked when we think about putting our wastewater into a pipe and sending it to somewhere else off site, that water then is gone from that landscape as well. Go ahead, next. So just a little bit about our program. There's about 8 staff right now that are an amazing set of dedicated and accomplished staff that work with our program. We do a lot of education, about 120 days of education that we've got scheduled around the state, providing largely the professionals that do all of the things that I mentioned, from maintaining a septic system, designing it, installing it, permitting it, private sector, public sector. Everyone comes through our education program as part of their kind of core curriculum. So we've got educators knowledgeable in engineering, soil science, hydrology, biogeochemistry, all kinds of things. We educate about 2,500 people a year through the professional program, and lots of others that we see, educated in less formal settings across a number of different platforms and settings. Another thing that we have established in the last couple of years that's kind of a new and a neat thing is people are concerned about losing professionals as people age out of working in this industry. And so we started a in-kind program, a scholarship program called the Keep It Going Scholarship. So we've had 23 people over the last 3 years, so about 7 or 8 people a year come through that scholarship program to get some free or reduced price education so that we can populate those professionals across the state with that program. Next. Just a little bit of research that we do helps kind of inform our education. And so with that kind of mix of both being educators and researchers within the same program, we're pretty well familiar with what those emerging and needs are across Minnesota. So got one more slide, I think, and just one example of research project that we kind of have going longer term with MnDOT, looking at rest areas across Minnesota. So 52 rest areas in Minnesota have septic systems there. So we have been doing a fair number of research projects with them on those systems. Just a highlight of that was performing some risk assessment at each of those. So looking at where are some of the bigger concerns with replacement or systems that aren't working as well as they could be. And so with some research, with some data collection, some monitoring, we've been able to save MnDOT lots of money. And this is just on one septic system, $150,000 because they're a little bit larger septic systems at some of these rest areas by carefully monitoring and making sure that it's performing up to what it needs to meet the state rules. We've been able to allow them to spend that money on other maintenance fixes and things like that. If you want to know about, let's see, maybe when you should pump your septic tank, you should see me over in the breakout room.
All right, thanks, Dan. We'll pass it over to Bonnie again real quick to tell us more about how we can stay in touch with the water resource.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. Hopefully that gives you some of a flavor of the kind of work that happens and all the various ways in which this team is connecting with the practitioners that are really managing all of this important water infrastructure behind the scenes. And as a result, keeping our water safe to boat and swim and fish and drink. And it really takes a huge community and supported by research in order to make that happen. So hopefully that sheds some light on some of the work that's happening that's really, really important, but maybe just doesn't get the credit that it deserves when we think about water in Minnesota. If you want to stay up to date on what's happening around water research and practice and education at the university, you can subscribe to our newsletter. Minigram comes out quarterly, and I think Mary just popped a link into the chat if you want to go over to our website and sign up for our newsletter. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. So stay in touch. We want to hear from you what water issues are important to you and how can we better connect you to the university and the water community. And then just an open invitation. We have a water resources conference annually in October. It's at the River Center in downtown St. Paul. Over 900 people come to this event every year. So if you are interested in water and want to learn about all the research and exciting stuff that's happening across the water community in Minnesota, consider coming to join us in October in St. Paul. So that's all I have. Stay in touch, and I'll pass it back over to Mary and Colin.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your great presentations today. We've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully you found it valuable to hear more about how water plays such an integral part to our daily life, even when it is out of sight. So I'm sure your interests are piqued after hearing our speakers discuss the research. So at this point, we'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. You can submit your questions via the chat if you would prefer, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question directly to one of our speakers. And then after maybe about 10 minutes, we'll go to breakout rooms where you can continue to ask questions more intimately, or if no one has any for the general audience, we can go there probably earlier.
There was one question that came in, elementary question. How does a stormwater pond work exactly? How do we rehab them?
Great question. So I think I'll take that one. So the way that the traditional stormwater pond has been designed and built in urban areas is one, to slow the rate down of runoff, eventually reaching the receiving water. So it slows the rate, captures some volume, and then it removes pollutants from settling. So predominantly the larger particulate pollutants settle out to the bottom of the stormwater pond. That's how they have traditionally been developed over many decades. In the more recent years, we're trying to design ponds to do other pollutant removals through plants and other dissolved pollutants that enter into that water column, if you will. And then on the outlet of the pond, we designed a pond to slowly release the water downstream versus all that fast and furious rate that I talked about. So it's design volume, it's design control, and particulate pollutant removal.
Thank you, John. It looks like there is a question for all of you, perhaps, Ravani. Are there volunteer opportunities to work with the Water Resources Center and learn more about the water behind the scenes?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Feel free to reach out to me or to the Water Resources Center directly to inquire about volunteer opportunities. We do have a variety of different programs for people to get involved in. I mean, one thing I can mention is we're working on similar to like being a master gardener, you can also be a Minnesota well steward. So there's other ways where we're trying to make sure that communities have the training to help educate their communities and their neighborhoods about issues related to water. So we've got whole other program that I didn't even mention that's doing private well testing clinics for residents throughout the state of Minnesota. So you can get your drinking water tested if you're on a private well, and then get education. And in this our case, a public health nurse helps to work with families to process that contaminant sampling data that they get back from their well testing and understand what options are available to them. And we can't cover all of the private wells in Minnesota on our own. So we're trying to recruit some volunteers that can really help us spread this information about how people can manage their private wells better. So that's just one example where we've got opportunities for people to get involved and be really ambassadors for this kind of important water infrastructure and water management within their communities. Yeah, and Anna says that you can adopt a drain in your neighborhood too. So take a look at that link as well.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have another one from Amy. So this is for John specifically. There's a pond in her neighborhood. How do I know if it's natural or man-made, and does it matter? Are you available for private consultations or assessments?
That is a great question. So again, going back to how our communities are developed, many of our ponds are designed and built. We call these DCPs, designed and constructed stormwater ponds, and they're built in what we call upland areas. There are other ponds that over multiple decades have been excavated in historic wetlands. And so about 50% of our stormwater ponds are historic wetlands, and about 50% were human built. And so there is a difference about how those operate, because a wetland does not work like a human installed swimming pool. And so there are differences. But as part of the urban stormwater system, they're both in play in terms of that. So, but how do you tell the difference? The best is working with your city public works unit. They're the one who manage the stormwater ponds at a local level. If you're not in the city, it might be the county or township. We typically at the Water Resources Center don't go out and do stormwater assessments. But we can point you in the resources if you live in a city or the local entity that would probably manage that.
All right, we have another one here from Echo. What's one thing you wish the standard homeowner knew or did to improve their water quality? Pretty.
Maybe Dan can answer that one.
Well, certainly if they have a septic system, it would be to follow the requirement that every septic system in Minnesota legally is required at least once every 3 years to be checked if their septic tank needs to be pumped. That doesn't mean that it needs to be pumped every 3 years, but it at least needs to be checked. That will not only help our water resources in Minnesota, that will also help your pocketbook in that you won't have bigger problems with your septic system and failures when you do plan to be there for the summertime or at the lake or whatever.
Can I jump in too?
Mm-hmm.
Just like Dan said, we often say flush it out of sight, out of mind. So if you have a septic system, it's going there. The one thing that I wish Minnesotans knew, whether they live in a city or just socialize in a city, is the water that falls on your driveway or the parking lot, and it goes down the driveway into that thing called the curb, and it goes a little bit down the curb and it disappears down a black hole. That water is not going to Pig's Eye treatment plant that Dan talked about. We do not send stormwater runoff to a treatment plant. It goes directly eventually to a receiving water. And so it's not out of sight, out of mind. It impacts the lakes that we fish, swim, water ski on. So the one thing I wish Minnesotans knew is we do not send urban stormwater runoff to this magical treatment plant that makes it all better.
Good to know. All right, we'll do one more question here before we go to breakout rooms. This is from Adam. Are cities, towns obligated to street sweep, or is that a local budgetary decision? Lives in Robbinsdale, and I don't recall seeing street sweeping this year, but they had a $20 million deficit in their school system, so perhaps that was first on the chopping block.
Are they obligated to street sweep? No, cities are obligated to perform 6 minimum control measures on urban stormwater runoff. One of those is pollution prevention. One of the most common ways of pollution prevention is street sweeping. So it's often something cities do. Are they obligated? So no, they're not obligated. It's a common practice. Depending on the size of the city, you may see more or less street sweeping. So Robbinsdale, not a very big city, not a very large public works budget. You probably wouldn't see them sweeping as much as, let's say, the city of Minneapolis, where they have a larger street sweeping program. It's a city by city basis.
All right, any last question? Looks like we have a couple minutes left.
Um,
Yeah, go for
this
it.
is Tom Lorang, and we got a pretty good audience here. I'm from southern Renville County, close to Morton, Minnesota, and I've been part of it used to be called Citizen Water Monitoring, where we kind of adopt a stream and you monitor it. I do it once a week, and I do two different local streams. And I always try to take maybe my 4-H youth, take somebody young with me. And I'm also a rainfall measurer. If we can find programs that involve our youth, it brings the adults on board too. It's great to see at our county fair somebody has got a water program or emphasis of some sort. I'm in extremely agricultural country. Minnesota River is about 3 miles away, but through my weekly monitoring, I see the water clarity change just based on a rainfall or no rainfall within my watershed. And my watersheds they go a long distance, but it's a pretty good sign to kind of observe this week after week. And I do it in 2 local county parks, and the people that camp there religiously, they know me as the water guy. And sometimes I'll have a kid with me. So anything we can do to help enhance this, we'll all be better off. I mean, the Twin Cities is an animal all in itself, but rural agriculture we have a lot of fingers pointed at us, unfortunately. And I think Shannon Martin used to be the lead of the Citizen Water, or whatever its new name is, but I think there's maybe a Waverly there now. Do you guys know who that is?
Thomas, I
We'll
don't know
leave the
who's in
discussion.
charge of that program right now, but I've actually used that data. So just want to say thank you that people who contribute citizen monitoring data through the MPCA, like that goes onto a database into a website that researchers have access to. And, monitoring every lake, river, and stream across the state with the, 250 million acres of waters that we have, it would be impossible for any agency to do it. So that citizen network is actually incredibly important, both for providing information on waters that don't get assessed all that often, in locations in across Minnesota, like that's just a hugely valuable resource. So just so know, like an end user here can provide a testimonial that type of data actually does get used by researchers, and it's really important. So thanks for that. And I think, I imagine that by each of those visits, you're paying attention, you're noticing things about that water body that other people in the community aren't paying attention to. And so you're developing that relationship. You like see what the water level in the river is changing. You're noticing the changes in the color of the river. And the more people that are paying attention to those things, the more we can address if there is a spill or if there is some infrastructure that fails. Having people who are paying attention to those systems allows us to have a much broader network of kind of early warning alerts, to notify people if there's something wrong. If you're noticing a fish kill, like these are all pieces of information that are really valuable for agencies and water managers. So yeah, I totally agree. Like the stuff that when you pay attention to things, you start to notice them, you appreciate them, you notice the changes, and the more people we can get engaged in thinking about and engaging with our waters, the better. So I love the fact that you bring kids along when you do your water sampling, and let's just love to see more of that happening across the state.
All right. Real quick before we go out to breakout rooms, we'll pass it off to Mary to plug some alumni events and whatnot.
Well, thank you, Colin. I just wanted to have a chance. I'm the Director of Alumni Constituent Relations for CFANS, and this event, as Colin mentioned, is brought to you by the CFANS Alumni Society Board of Directors. So I wanted to thank Colin, and there's several board members who are here today. This is an important cornerstone program for the Alumni Society to help alumni and friends of the college learn about the cool research that's going on here in CFANS. And I wanted to thank Bonnie, John, and Dan, and Anna for this was super interesting to learn more about your research. I've taken some notes and I look forward to following up. Also, I just wanted to remind all of you, events coming up, and helping students. Speaking of students learn, we have a tremendous mentor program that matches current CFAN students with professionals who are thinking about doing particular professions. So if you or anyone you know would like to help influence the career of a student, please consider the mentor program and be sure to stop by the CFANS exhibit at the State Fair this year. And watch for the 2027 Classes Without Quizzes program. So with that, Colin, I have created the rooms, the breakout rooms. So as you mentioned, there are 3 rooms. Bonnie will be staying here, and the rooms will be open until about 1:15. So you can just select what room you want to go to. But before we do, can we give a virtual round of applause to the Water Resources Center team and to the Alumni Society? All right, thank you so much.